organization. Several officers and members are in attendance today. In fact, 2 of our members are presenting this evening. We are in the middle of our membership drive right now. So if you are someone who is currently a member, please find somebody who's not and nominate them to become a member. We'd really appreciate that. If you are not a current member and you're interested, if you're a student who's doing research, talk to your mentor about becoming a member. That would be great. Someone lost a card here. Jeff and Robert, you're in attendance. Come see me. So, if you're interested in membership, if you're a current member, please nominate somebody. We'd appreciate it. We need those within the next 2 weeks or so. So, without further ado, we have Dr. Kim Carlson for biology, Dr. Doug Biggs from history, doing a joint presentation this evening on Queen Anne. So I will hand it over to them.
Thank you. I'll try to move here to the middle. It might be a little bit easier and better. I won't be on TV that way.
You right there, it's fine.
Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. What we want to do this afternoon and early evening is take a look at the last of the Stuart queens and the last of the Stuart family to rule the United Kingdom in the late, she lives in the late 17th but the early 18th century. So this is about Queen Anne. And Queen Anne is a very interesting historical figure for a whole bunch of different reasons, which we'll talk about this afternoon. But some of the most interesting are because of her medical issues, which were, as we'll see, incredibly challenging to her throughout her entire life, and how someone with all of these challenges, or health challenges, is able to actually try and generally be successful at ruling one of the great European powers in this period. Okay, so Anne comes to the throne in a part of a very short-lived, as British dynasties go, dynasty, the Stuarts. And it is her reign and her life are fraught with a whole bunch of difficult political issues, the most important of which was trying to sustain the dynasty, trying to produce children for the next generation down the road. And Anne was the daughter of James II of England and James VII of Scotland. And he was the youngest son of Charles I of England and Charles I of Scotland, who had been beheaded by Parliament and that nasty man Oliver Cromwell in 1649 at the end of the English Civil Wars. Okay? And there was a long interregnum between 1649 and 1660 when Charles II, his eldest son, James's eldest brother, becomes king. Now, James II, what is in many ways a problematic figure for British historians like me, because James II had the bad manners to be Roman Catholic, because he spent most of the period from about 1645 when he was in exile in France, and he developed an affinity for Catholic worship, and he converted to Catholicism. And not everybody in Britain, which is a Protestant country this very day, thought that good. And many Scots who are Presbyterians did not like James II. And Charles, his elder brother, who rules from 1660 to 1685, realized that if his brother was allowed to raise his children as Catholics, there would be a huge, huge problem. And so he demanded that both of James's daughters, Anne and Mary, be raised as Protestant, which they were. They were good, old-fashioned Anglicans, Church of England. And her father's reign, James II's reign, was brief and troubled, and because of his Catholicism. And it seemed initially that because James was older and his first wife had passed, Mary and Anne's mother, that he probably, hopefully, maybe wouldn't have any children. Because, of course, if you have more children and your dad is Roman Catholic, the fear is you're going to raise a Roman Catholic child that will succeed over the two daughters, especially if it was a son. Well, lo and behold, with his second wife, Anne of Modena, who was an Italian Catholic, they actually do have a child, James Stewart, who becomes known to history as the Old Pretender. And this made a Catholic dynasty way more likely, because he was going to be raised as Catholic. And there was no way that the Church of England was going to go back to be part of the Catholic Church. No way. And so, what happens in 1688 is James II is removed in what's called in British historiography the Glorious Revolution. And Mary, Anne's elder sister, who was married to William of Orange, who was a Calvinist, succeeded in 1688. And William, Mary dies early, and then William continues to rule until 1702. But the problem was, for the Stuart family here, no matter how hard Mary tried, and she did try, they had no children. So, there's no one in this branch of the family, the William and Mary branch, to succeed. So the crown devolves to Queen Anne. Okay? And Anne, by royal machinations and royal decree, was married to a guy named George of Denmark, who was Lutheran. And so Anne becomes queen with her Protestant husband. So all these Protestants are able to maintain control of the throne. So Anne's job, if you will, in addition to being queen, is to make sure with her husband that there is a successor. Because you got to have a successor. Male or female, you have to have a child that survives. And this is a problem, as we'll see. Anne's reign, she was born the fourth child of James, as we talked about a little bit. The Act of Settlement forbade any Roman Catholic to succeed to the English throne, or the British throne, sadly to this very day. And again, Anne becomes queen in 1702. A lot of her reign was taken up with the Wars of Spanish Succession between the French on the one side and Spain on the other. And this draws in everybody in the western part of Europe into these, kind of endless wars between the French and everybody else between 1701 and 1714. And the most prominent general and politician in these years was John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough. And, excuse me, he is the direct ancestor of Winston Churchill, the great Prime Minister from World War II. So, Churchill's victories over the French at Blenheim and again at Ramillies secured his place as a leading politician and a leading courtier in Anne's reign. And, this is one of those moments where you see how closely politics is tied with war in the early 18th century. And this is an artist's interpretation of the Duke of Marlborough at Blenheim after he'd won a great victory. And the first thing he does, is he writes a letter to his wife, one of the Queen's favorites, telling her, I have no time to say more, but beg you, will give my duty to the Queen and let her know her army has won a glorious victory. And his wife, Sarah, was one of Queen Anne's favorites. She was one of Queen Anne's best friends for much, not all, of her reign in life. And here's a picture of Sarah Churchill, the first Duchess of Marlborough, who did a tremendous amount of good service making sure the Queen thought a lot of her husband. Okay. A lot of her reign is taken up with court intrigues and party politics that, we can't get into in any real depth, but suffice to say, the Tories, or the conservatives of the modern British parliamentary world, the titled nobility, the gentry, and the Anglican priests, the Anglican bishops, archbishops, clergy, on the one side, and the Whigs, who were the commercial elite, and the religious nonconformist Protestants on the other, Presbyterians and Puritans. And these guys fought like cats and dogs over the control of the government, and hence the access to the Queen. And Anne found herself kind of pulled between these two poles throughout her reign. And the Whigs were in power for much of the early years of her reign, and thus the Whigs, not wanting to give the conservatives a whole bunch of power and to help the wars, did not always fund the wars as well as they should. And hence, Sarah Churchill was instrumental in getting the Queen to push the Whig Party, who controlled Parliament, to fund the wars. The Tories were frustrated throughout the reign with the fact they couldn't seem to win a majority in Parliament, and so they worked to drive the Whigs from government by using religion as a bludgeon. And it works. This goes back to what was called the Test Act of 1673. It's a typo, 1673. And what happened in the Test Act was all civil servants had to take communion in the Anglican rite. Okay? So anybody who held any kind of job in the British government had to be Anglican, period. And if you refused to take communion in an Anglican church, then you were driven out of office. And that way the conservatives, the Tories, could assure that they would have enough political power to actually take over the government. And that's what they do after 1704, when they drive through another Conformity Act and helps to drive the Whigs from power. And, like I said before, Anne drifts from one pole to another throughout the reign, depending on who she favors at any one point, and the winds of politics. And historians tend to run a full range on her when we look at her as a queen. Some historians think that she was very strong and very powerful, and her armies did her very fine service in France and in Spain, as did her navy all around the world. While others see her as being weak and merely a plaything for politicians in this incredibly topsy-turvy, internecine political warfare and fighting that goes on throughout her reign, who did nothing but support one favorite and then another in turn across her very long, relatively long reign. And you can kind of go either way on that. But, what we want to talk about is Anne's personal life, and a focus on that. And Anne's health issues or health challenges became evident very early for her as a young person. And she was not always healthy as a child, and there were reports that she was not expected to survive infancy. And as a young person, we know that she suffered from what at the time was called defluxion, but 18th century and 17th century doctors called an excessive watering of the eyes. And she was sent to live in France with her aunt. Now, I'm not sure that living in France is a particularly bad thing, but I'm not quite sure that it solves eye problems either. But this is a 17th, 18th century way of trying to solve or to cure medical conditions. Her marriage to George of Denmark was, by all accounts, a happy one, and Anne was devastated by his untimely death in 1708, and this weighs heavily on her. And probably some historians, most recent historians, argue this contributed to her health challenges that she faces late in her life, especially the depression issues, which we now think is a part of her later years. Also, too, I think this is a very difficult thing, and if anyone, has had children or wants to have children, having 17 pregnancies across your adult lifetime as a woman is challenging, shall we say? And it's even more challenging that almost none of them survive. Only one survives infancy. 8 of them were miscarriages, and 4 of them were born stillborn. which would take a terrible toll, not only physically, but also psychologically on the mother. In 1691, we know from the sources that she could not walk without limping. By 1697, she suffered from what her doctors diagnosed as vapors, which is almost certainly what we would call depression, as we diagnose it today. In 1699, she suffered from serious bouts of gout, and in 1700, her right hand was so swollen she could not sign documents, government documents that she had to prove. She just couldn't write. In 1702, she was so overweight and so lame that she could not even walk into House of Lords to deliver the Queen's speech. So she, it was really very difficult for her to move even because she'd become so incredibly obese. Excuse me. Her only child to survive was this guy, William Duke of Gloucester. And he too was very sickly. He was born with hydroencephaly, so he had water on the brain, and he was fully cared for by his physicians, who bled him regularly, because, in 17th, 18th centuries medical science, if the body humors were out of balance, you bleed people and the body humors will go back into balance, or you die, one of the two. But also, and I don't know how this happened, I'm not really sure, I want to find out if the documents survive, which they probably do. They drained fluid off of his brain, which probably did a lot more harm than good. He died in 1700 at the age of 11. His mother obviously was devastated because this guy, this little boy, was the heir, the Stuart family heir to the throne. Without him, there's no one left alive. There's no Stuarts left alive in the direct line. And it's probable that he died of pneumonia, although the bleeding that the doctors performed in his last illness probably didn't do him any good either. Anne's health from 1702, 1704 continues to decline. She becomes increasingly overweight. She becomes increasingly depressed, clinically depressed, and I think the way we would describe it today. And the fact that her children all pass before her and her husband passes before her was terribly draining on her. In 1713, she was unable to walk from January to July. And at Christmas 1713, many people feared that the Queen would die because she lay unconscious in the royal palace for hours. They could not rouse her. She still breathed, but she just lay there. In July, she suffered a terrible stroke, and on the anniversary of her son's passing, and she died about 7:30 in the morning on the 1st of August, according to her physician. And I wanted to end with this and turn this over to Dr. Carlson, but I think it's powerful. Her physician said of her final days, and I think there's some pathos to this that's worth knowing. I believe sleep was never more welcome to a weary traveler than death was to her. And I think there's something very poignant and sad about that.
Thank you, Dr. Biggs. So, Dr. Biggs did a great job of introducing Queen Anne. And he gave this from the historian's perspective. And so I've done a lot of digging from the biologist's perspective. And we intentionally set it up this way because you're going to see some of the things that he said were actually what is believed to this time, but actually not true. And that's okay. Okay, so historical records, that's one thing about historical records, they always do change. So, he did say that she was not able to walk. Well, she was pretty infirm, she couldn't walk, and that was because of her health problems she had, in addition to her obesity. So she got carried around a lot. And not even like this, just in a chair a lot of places. That'd be kind of nice. I'd like somebody to carry me to and from every place too. And she is the last of the sickly Stuarts. Actually, the Stuart line ended 3 different times throughout history. So I am a geneticist by training, and so I find these sorts of things really interesting, especially when somebody has so many pregnancies that they've lost. Okay, so we're gonna look, this is a pedigree of the Stewarts, all right? We're not gonna go through all of it because we don't have enough time. There's something that should be really interesting to you, those of you who understand pedigrees and understand royal families. If you look at this, the inbreeding is missing, okay? Usually royal families are fraught with a lot of inbreeding. Well, that only occurs here with Mary, which is Anne's older sister. So she married her cousin, William of Orange, all right? Anne herself did not marry her cousin, okay? That she married outside of the family. So where does this come from? Did she have a genetic disease? Well, maybe not. So if we go way, way, way back to her ancestors, well, one died of stroke, not stoke, and vascular dementia. This one, gout, dropsy, and possibly rheumatoid arthritis. Gout, I doubt. And I'll tell you why as we go along. This guy was in excellent health. He had what they call a medical execution. That's what they call it in the books I read. That means he got his head chopped off. Okay? So he had no problems. His wife, she had a drug overdose. She overdosed on opioids because she had bronchitis. Okay? So see, that was prevalent back then too. That's nothing new. Here her father had a stroke and a possible brain tumor. Her mother had breast cancer. She was morbidly obese, and she herself had 8 pregnancies. And then her sister died of smallpox. Her husband died of bacterial pneumonia. And where do we even begin with Queen Anne? Okay, if you've seen the movie The Favorite, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's talk about her. This is a picture of her when she was about 2 years old. I'm going to reiterate a little bit of what Dr. Biggs said just because it's important. She was born in 1665. He talked about her parents. She was the 4th child. She had an older sister, Mary. She also had 2 older brothers that died. Her education was sparse. She had education in languages and music because nobody expected her ever to reign anything. That's what they did with girls at that time. You got your education in language, music, and that's it. Okay? She was very, very sickly. They never thought she was going to survive past infancy. So here's a picture. Here she is right here. Here's her sister Mary, mom and dad. As Dr. Biggs said, she has deflection of the eyes. Okay, she was sent to live with Henrietta Maria of France, which was her grandma. Okay? This woman was surrounded by death. I don't know if she was the pinnacle of death or what, but her grandma dies. And then she's sent to live with her aunt, Henrietta. Well, Henrietta dies. And now she's sent back home, and 2 of her siblings die. And then her mom dies. And then she contracts smallpox when she's 12. Well, why is that important? Well, when she was 12, her older sister Mary was getting married to William of Orange, and she didn't get to go because she had smallpox. Now, how many of you think you could live through smallpox? Well, she did. Okay, but she was very sickly. Okay, in 1683, at the age of 18, she married Prince George of Denmark, and he was 30. And he was not a very stellar fella. Okay, his father-in-law, Anne's dad, said he was a drip. In fact, his words were, "I have tried him drunk and I've tried him sober, but there is nothing in him." Okay, he was a very wishy-washy sort of guy. Dad did not like him, so he did not want her to marry him, but that was her choice, and he let her marry her choice. Okay, he had asthma, he had arthritis, so we're not looking at the pinnacle of health here in a husband. Okay, so how is Anne remembered? Well, she was middle-sized. I don't exactly what that means. And she was well-made. Okay, maybe I'm middle-sized and well-made. I don't exactly know what that means. But that's how they said she was. Okay, I think she's rather very pretty in this picture and looks pretty delightful, but that's just me. I don't know. I wasn't the one painting it, and I never met her. They said she was graceful and majestic in her early age. This is really important. I want you to remember this. She had extremely delicate hands. They said she had very beautiful hands. And remember that as we go along, because that becomes important. Uh-oh. There we go. Wrong button. Okay, but she had a ruddy complexion. That's also very important as we go along. Okay, so here she is when she's 29 years old. Here's one of the few pictures, besides the one that Dr. Biggs shows, of her with her son William. And as Dr. Biggs already mentioned, Dr. Biggs, are you doing something? Oh, he had hydrocephalus, okay? At age of 2, he had an attack of the ague, and he recovered. Does anybody know what the ague is? It's the fever. He had a horrible, and remember that, I'll get to that in the end. Ague, thank you, Dr. Clark, my organic chemistry professor. Okay, so he had this terrible fever, and he recovers. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on as to why that's important. But he did recover. So at age 11, he had a birthday party. He died 6 days later. Okay, now, actually, his symptomology he had with hydrocephalus was not what killed him. Okay, so this is hydrocephalus. Somebody who has hydrocephalus has a very enlarged head, and it's because there's water that is accumulating in the ventricles of the brain. So when they actually did the letting of the water out of the brain, it actually was a good thing. It's what kept him alive till he was about 11 years old. Now, this can have a genetic basis or it can be congenital. So, and we don't know which type he had. Okay, so 1 in 500 to 1,000 children actually suffer from this condition. The complications include headaches, hearing loss, muscle weakness, seizures, and hormonal balances. They said that when he was a child, they'd go and try to put a hat on him. He'd have to wear a man's hat. He couldn't run. He was very sickly all the time. All these side effects that you see here, these complications. But that's not what killed Prince William. What killed him is even sadder. Okay? He died from acute bacterial pharyngitis. Does anybody know what that's called now? No? Tonsillitis. Okay, so he died from a severe case of tonsillitis. Did they have antibiotics back then? No. So that's what killed him, was tonsillitis that he caught from another kid. Since he was already immune compromised because of his hydrocephaly, he died. Okay, and there's nothing they could do for him. So this is a picture of Queen Anne when she was 37 years old in 1702. And her reign began after her brother-in-law died, William of Orange. Okay, at this point she was almost practically an invalid. They said that she had gout. If you look at the historical records, they said she had gout. I saw the movie The Favorite. I don't know how many of you did. Wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, you should. As I'm watching this movie, I'm like, there is no way this woman had gout. And there's a couple of reasons why, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Okay, but it's always said she had gout. She suffered from bouts of extreme pain. She had facial and leg edema. Edema swelling. Okay. Her face was red and spotted. And, of course, she was morbidly obese. Now, part of the obesity is, you know, if you're like the king or queen, you get like all the best foods, and if it's there, you eat it. Okay? You can't blame her for that. Okay? She had 17 pregnancies but no heir. And we'll talk about that. That becomes very important, too. I've been pregnant twice. I couldn't imagine being pregnant 17 times. Oh my gosh, no way. Okay, so these are her 17 pregnancies. And when they happened and what happened. So some of them were born and they died like 2 years later. Okay, miscarriage. Here is William, the Duke never to be. And then here's Mary, 2 months premature, lived 2 hours. This one I think is interesting. September, she had a double miscarriage. A son is 7 months and the other 2 to 3 months. So what happened was she was pregnant with twins. One died early on. When the second one died, they were able to look at the other one and tell that it died 5 months earlier. Okay, so she carried around a dead fetus along with a live fetus for a long time. And then we go on to here. So 1700, in January, that was her last pregnancy. The last time she was pregnant was when her son William was still alive. So she was pregnant with that child when William was still alive. After she had that pregnancy, she would never be pregnant again. And at that time, she was 35 years old. So her final days, as Dr. Biggs alluded to, Christmas 1713. She had a painful inflammation on her inner right thigh. They did a bleeding to treat her. Thought she had gout all over her stomach. They treated her with Jesuit's bark. Okay, Jesuit's bark contains quinine. Okay, What's really interesting about this is they thought, hey, she's going to be great because she's gone blind. Apparently, if you give somebody enough Jesuit bark, enough quinine, they go blind, and at that time they thought that was a good sign that it was working. I would never see that doctor again. Okay, in summer of 1714, she had no appetite, she had nausea, she had convulsions, she was speechless, motionless, and miserable. And then on her last day, she ate a very large quantity of black cherries. She lay back and she died of a massive stroke. I don't know why, but they had to put that into the black cherries. Not regular cherries, but black cherries, okay? And she died of a stroke. They did not announce her death immediately. They waited for a long time, and they would not allow a full autopsy of her. All they would allow is a cursory autopsy of her. So what we know now is based upon a cursory autopsy. To get actually a definitive diagnosis, we would have to exhume her and actually do some testing on her, okay? So what was wrong with her? A lot of people thought she had porphyria. Okay? Porphyria is a disease where you can't release porphyrin, and this is what caused the madness of King George, even though we're not sure that King George had porphyria, okay? And with this does cause some symptoms that are similar to what Queen Anne had, but she didn't have porphyria, okay? She didn't have the exposure. She went out to the sun. These people who have this, they'll go out to the sun and their skin will burn. Also, they build up so much porphyrin that their teeth turn red. This is where the legends of vampires and Count Dracula comes from. So that's not what she had, and she wasn't crazy. Okay, she didn't have this madness, this stupor that goes along with this disease. So that's not what she had. We'll rule that out. Did she have syphilis? I don't know why everybody thought she was crazy, because she really wasn't crazy. Okay, so they thought, well, she had some mental problem. She never had any cankers, any sores. She didn't have hair loss. She did have a swollen lymph nodes, sore throat, and rash, but not in the way that you get with syphilis. Okay, so that's another hypothesis that we can rule out. She did not have syphilis. What about a pelvic deformation? When you have 17 pregnancies and not all of them live, it's probably a good guess she might have some kind of deformation in her pelvis. Okay, so what we're talking about is something like this. Well, if that were true, she'd have no pregnancies that lived any length of time. Okay, so good idea, but anatomically, not going to happen. Okay, Rh factor incompatibility. Okay, that was a good guess, right? Maybe she had that. Okay, but the problem here with this is that if you have this, you'll at least have one child that survives, because it's the subsequent children where the problem comes in. And they didn't have Rogam at that time to treat anybody. So her early pregnancies would have lived, it's all the late ones that would have died. Okay, so this hypothesis is not correct either. So what about gout? When we hear about Queen Anne, we hear, oh, she had terrible gout. She had it so bad she couldn't walk. Okay, well, when I saw the movie The Favorite, I'm like, there is no way this woman has gout. And she didn't. Okay, so with gout affects men more than it does women. Women are affected postmenopausal. She was not postmenopausal. As they said, she menstruated like a young 13-year-old. Okay, that's in the archives. So there is no way. Also, gout affects first, usually your big toe. It goes into certain joints, and it's a unilateral sort of inflammation, not the bilateral inflammation that the Queen had. So why do you think that they would say that she had gout? Well, gout is called the disease of kings. She was a very, very strong queen. So we're just going to say she had gout, because that's the disease of kings. Women don't get gout as much as men because we have estrogen, and the estrogen reduces our uric acid levels. But as you go through menopause, that changes. Okay, so most of the time, this is men. And they said she had gout because she's aristocracy. This is what men had. So when I said about her grandmother, I doubt her grandmother had gout either. Okay, it's just because she was a woman in aristocracy that they said she had gout. She never had gout. Okay? What about rheumatoid arthritis? So wanted her to have this because I have rheumatoid arthritis. I thought, well, we have something in common. Okay, remember her very delicate hands? Okay, people who have rheumatoid arthritis, okay, your hands are one of the first things that are affected. And I don't have them yet. But you get your joints become distended and distorted, and your hands become very kind of ugly. Okay, they look like knotty tree branches. Okay, and she didn't have that. Okay, also the symptoms in the joints that she had does not fit. So she did not have rheumatoid arthritis either. Now, she did have joint pain. Okay, and we can tell now what she actually did have. Okay, so it's not that. So what is actually wrong with Queen Anne? Does anybody have a guess?
Lupus.
It's never lupus.
It's never lupus according to House. Okay, so she did have though systemic lupus. Okay, and one of the things that should give that away is we said that she had blotchy skin. She actually had a butterfly rash on her face. That's very typical of people who have lupus. She also had the other conditions that go along with this, including the joint pain. Okay, she also had high blood pressure, or they believe that she did, and she had problems with her heart. She had pneumonia at different times. All these fit. Okay, what she might have had. So the clinical criteria: blotchy, pitted face with a malar rash. That's that butterfly rash. She had that. Recurrent polyarthritis. She had recurrent polyarthritis, meaning arthritis in many joints in the body. Facial and leg edema. Okay, she had that. Seizures, nosebleeds, and a lethal stroke. That's how she died, was from lethal stroke. Okay, so she had systemic lupus, but that doesn't explain the lost pregnancies. Lupus doesn't explain that. Well, we can explain that now. And actually there's a disease that was discovered in about the late 1980s that tells what the other part of her disease was. She had antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, known as APS. Okay, APS is really interesting. Okay, it is also called Hughes syndrome for the medical doctor that discovered it. It is causes women who have lupus to have recurrent pregnancy loss. In fact, 1 in every 2 people, every woman who have lupus have APS, and it explains the pregnancy loss. Because what it does is it causes thrombocytopenia, and it causes the women when they're pregnant to actually have problems that lead them to miscarry. Okay, so if you look down here, they have a lot of miscarriages. So what Queen Anne actually had was lupus with APS. And that's actually pretty well documented that this is what she had. She never had gout. Okay? So Dr. House would be happy somebody finally has lupus. Okay? So I have to address this. So what about those rabbits? So who saw The Favorite in here? Oh my gosh, you guys are all disappointing. You all need to go see that movie, okay? So in the movie, she had all these rabbits, and the rabbits were supposed to signify all her pregnancy losses. Not true. She didn't have any rabbits. But I have a good story that I have to tell, and this shows you how these rabbits just influenced what I was thinking. So this is Dr. John Radcliffe, and Dr. John Radcliffe was Queen Anne's doctor until they got into a huge fight. Okay, and in fact, when she was on her deathbed, he couldn't come and service and work with her because he had gout, and he was in much pain from his real gout, unlike what she didn't have. But he did take care of William. Remember when I said that he had the fevers and he survived? It was because of this guy. So to show her appreciation, Queen Anne gave him 1,000 guinea. When I say that, what do you think of? Guinea pigs. Oh, and Dr. Twig said the other one. Guinea hens. See, we're all there. But it's money. Okay, so this is a guinea. Okay, so I was like, whoa, she gave him why would you give somebody 1,000 guinea pigs? And then I was talking to somebody else and they said guinea hens. I'm like, why would you give somebody 1,000 guinea hens? Well, it makes more sense. You gave them $1,000. Okay, so that's how the movie shaped that. So with that, the book that I used, Frederick Holmes, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, he wrote a book called The Sickly Stewards. And this is really interesting because he's a medical doctor who went back to school to get his master's degree after he already had his MD in British history. And this book is actually his master's thesis. And what he did is he took all the medical records from the stewards and he analyzed them from a modern perspective. And this is how we know what Queen Anne actually died from. It's a wonderful book if you're interested in medical history. And with that, Dr. Biggs and I will take any questions you have.
Yes. Is lupus and APS genetic?
So lupus is an autoimmune disorder, and all autoimmune disorders do have a genetic basis in certain families, but they don't have to have a genetic basis. What we're seeing from the connection between lupus and APS is that there is a genetic connection between them. Yep.
So lupus and APS doesn't necessarily explain the short-term lives of like a couple minutes, a couple hours. So what do you think that would be?
You mean like children?
Yes.
No, it actually does. So women who have lupus and APS, yeah, they will have miscarriages, they'll have stillbirths, they'll have children who live for a short period of time. But her other children that died after like 2 years, they died from smallpox, okay, which was prevalent at that time. Both her children that died that early were all from smallpox, and I forgot to say that. So thank you, Josh, for asking that. Other questions? We have lots of people, no questions? Come on, yeah. Come on, people, ask questions. All right.
You know, if MS is, how different is MS from lupus?
So MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, they all fall in the same family of autoimmune disorders. And when you go in to get checked for one, you usually get checked for all of them. They're in that same family. They have a different clinical output, and they also have a different genetic output that we can check for them. MS is particularly interesting because we don't really know what the cause of MS is, but it does have a genetic basis. It can have a viral component. It can have other components to it also. Yeah, MS is a really kind of crazy sort of disease because it has many different components that are involved in it. Other questions? Well, okay.
Go ahead, Ginger.
So you said her mother or grandmother also, they thought she had gout. Did she actually also maybe have lupus?
Yeah, so what's interesting is they've been, this same guy who wrote this book, he's been looking back, and other historians, medical historians have been looking back at both her sister, her mom. They're pretty positive she had breast cancer and that she died from breast cancer, but that she may have had APS. You don't have to have lupus to have APS, it's just that they go along with each other a lot more often. They believe that her sister had APS, her mother had APS, her grandmother had possibly had lupus also. Yep. And so there's a huge push now to have the bodies exhumed so that they can take samples so they can actually test them. But I doubt that'll happen. Other questions?
Over there.
Oh.
Is lupus more inheritable through females, or does it also occur within men as well?
So lupus is more of a female-specific disorder than it affects more females than it does males. It's rare in males, but it can happen to males. But it is more rare in males than it is in females. And a lot of these diseases, the reason autoimmune disorders are actually more prevalent in males than females is because of females' estrogen levels. Our hormone levels kind of regulate that. Anything else? Any other questions? Well, I would like to thank you all for coming, and I want to tell you, please tip your waitresses. They did a wonderful job. This is a lot of people for them to handle, so make sure you tip them well. Do we have another Science Cafe coming up, Dr. Hill?
Monday, the 16th of March.
Monday, the 16th of March will be Marty Frank, who is a physiologist, friend of Dr. Steele's. Boy, those of you who are thinking of a career in the health field, that might be a really great one for you to come and listen to. It'll be up here, 5:30 again.
3:30.
Oh, 3:30, I'm sorry. 3:30 in Copeland Hall, 142. That information will be coming up. That's right, because it's for our drive. If you are interested in being in Sigma Xi, please talk to one of the officers or people who are in Sigma Xi. Otherwise, thank you for attending.